Parts work integration, the cure to procrastination and self-sabotage. This is the video part 3 on shadows, and this is split ego states. So split ego states can also be seen as parts, and it can be referred to as parts work. And this is by far the most complex version of shadow work. They are created when a part of us is walled off and isolated from the rest of us. Again, like with introjections and also kind of like with projections, it usually happens at a specific time or a time period in a specific circumstance with specific people. So as you can see, it's all about going back to the core wound and seeing when we were initially wounded and then healing it from there rather than just messing around with the symptoms, triggers, and mental processes. And the healing process for split ego states or parts is reintegration. So introjects, remember, it was to let go and give back. Projections, it was to re-own. And for split ego states, it's reintegration. Now, what's the difference between reintegration and re-owning? Because that can be a little bit confusing. Re-owning is when we take responsibility. We accept, oh, wait, it's not actually this person, it's me. It's not this person being arrogant. It's actually me realizing that I'm arrogant and I'm being extra sensitive to other people because I actually don't like that about myself. It's taking responsibility. It's taking ownership. Reintegration is realizing that this part which is self-sabotaging and procrastinating is actually just a part of you, therefore is you. And there's just a miscommunication between you two about what's best for you and about what you want, and you have to come together. And when you come together, normally, so with letting go, with introjections, it's like, it feels like a massive weight is being lifted off your shoulders. Like an anchor that was holding you back from when you were sprinting is just gone. So it makes you feel so much more light and alive. With a projection, because you're taking that responsibility into the world, sometimes that responsibility can be heavy, but alongside that heaviness, if the heaviness is even there, and heavy isn't a good way to describe that, it's just like the same way that with great power comes responsibility, you feel so much more empowered and powerful and able to actually take ownership back in your life. For split ego state, when you reintegrate, you feel so much more whole, and it doesn't feel like there's a part of you which is fighting against you. Whereas the anchor is like an inanimate object which is just pulling you back. With a split ego state that's been walled off, it feels like there's an actual person in front of you fighting and is smart and is intelligent and can, if it isn't fighting you, it can convince you to do something else. Whereas an anchor is just holding you back in the race, a split ego state can talk you out of even doing the race to begin with, right? So when that goes, not only do you feel like that isn't happening, but that person is now pushing you. So the thing that was sabotaging you is now the person who is becoming your personal coach and is making, and is 2 times, 5 times, 10xing whatever output you're able to do already because you're working together now as a team. And this is why it's the most complex, and which is why if you're doing parts work on yourself, go and download my most practical guides to shadow work on the internet. But really, I advise you to go and find a one-on-one mentor to work with this stuff, is because there can be more than one ego state happening at the time. What that means is that you can have 4 ego states come up at once, and they're all having this dialogue between you, and you're also involved as well. So it can become really, really complicated and really, really complex, really, really fast, which is why, if there's 4 ego states coming up within you, 100% you need to work with somebody, right? Especially if you're just beginning. That's only for really, really advanced practitioners, not just in shadow work, but also when it comes to development and developmental psychology. So just work with one at a time if you can. And in order to reintegrate, there has to be a dialogue, which means you have to keep track of what everyone's motivations are and aims are, okay? Luckily, there is a system which you can use to do that. However, just warning you, it is the most complex. So if it's a little bit daunting, a little bit too much at the beginning, perfectly normal. Download my shadow work guide, get on the call with a one-on-one mentor that you trust. Before we get into the different systems that ego states can be living in, what's essential, which is going to be the last part of this mini-series, is the dialogue is needed with unconditional love and acceptance. The reason why this split ego state is walled off and split off from you is because you did that at some point. Or if it wasn't you, it was another part or a collection of your parts all did that because they view this split ego state as something which shouldn't be a part of the whole for whatever reason. Either it's not good enough, it's sabotaging, it's not loved, it's doing something that's annoying, whatever it is. It's kind of like a family, like a dysfunctional family, deciding that they're going to go cold turkey on one family member. So we need to develop unconditional love and acceptance. This comes from the idea of Carl Rogers, one of the most influential therapists of all time. Started human-centered therapy or client-centered therapy and blew cognitive therapy out of the water in the 1950s and 1960s. And he called this principle the unconditional positive regard. I like to use the term the unconditional loving witness from one of my other mentors, Kim Barter. He's been a psychotherapist for over 30 years and also started the stages model in developmental psychology. Why is that so important? This part needs to feel like you're not going to judge it. Only then can it open up. The same way you work with people, if you're leading teams, if you're doing sales and you have to make sure that the person you're speaking to actually feels appreciated and isn't just being closed all of the time, right? Especially if you're doing a bit more high-end one-on-one mentorship, that kind of stuff. You need to make sure their concerns are actually heard and they feel like their concerns are actually heard and you're not just running through a sales script. Working with teams, if you're into office politics, I have a client that works in asset management, so kind of corporate finance, and office politics is obviously a big issue, as well as a software engineer who lives in the US at the moment, who also has to talk about office politics. The same way that you treat people to get them to open up to you is you have to genuinely accept whatever they're going to say with no judgment. Only then can deeper parts of dialogue start to open up. When deeper parts of dialogue can start to open up, that's when reintegration can happen. No other way, right? Now, the system you need to keep in mind when you're doing split ego state work or parts-based integration is there's ego-based systems, there's belief-based systems, there's thinking-based systems, and then there's awareness-based systems. Ego-based systems is where a lot of split ego states can be walled off, and it's when they want something. I just want sex. I just want food. I just want to relax. I just want gratification. I just want to not work, right? These are all very simple ego-based wants. We develop these, if we were going to map them to human consciousness, we develop these at like 3 years old, like the terrible toddler years, basically, where it's like, I want that, I'm going to get it. And that's really useful when we're a toddler because we go from being a really passive baby who has to cry to get anything and can't really communicate, to instead of waiting for somebody to give them something, as a toddler, you have to learn the skill to just go out there and take it. We also know we'll probably know a few people that are still operating from this a lot of the time, right? So that's an ego-based system. To convince an ego part, right, a split ego state, that you're all on the same page and that it should actually work together rather than fighting against you. Let's say it just wants to not be bored. And every time you do work, you can't do work and you just procrastinate and self-sabotage. That's an ego-based system. It wants to not be bored, right? You have to convince it that, first of all, it's okay to want ego wants. It's okay for you to want ego wants. You have to basically show it the way that you are going about life is actually a better way to get that ego want. And then it's super on board, right? So an example would be, like, let's say with it's procrastination, doom scrolling, or it's stuff like porn. Like with porn is a good example. I just did this in my procrastination video, so go ahead and watch that. I really recommend it. The four different types of procrastination, and porn is in section 2, type 2. And it's basically like, I want a sexual gratification. Well, and then you know, go and watch it, and then you don't have the energy to either work or actually go out and socialize and find a connection in real life. How you would run that ego dialogue, and how I did that with a client and now he doesn't have issues with porn at all, is we showed him that actually by doing our method and our work together and approaching socializing and doing some social training is actually a better way to get that. And then the ego want was super on board and that issue was resolved. Belief-based systems, this is when we're around like 10 years old. Again, these numbers are just to give you a sense of where people are, right? 10 years old, belief-based systems, when we start developing them, is when we believe something about something. So ego-based systems are very simple. They're also very fast as well. Belief-based systems are more structured and they're more slow, because in order to make a decision, you have to check in with your belief-based system. An example of this would be an ego state can have a belief that the world is unfair, right? And in order to change a belief-based system or an ego state in a belief-based system, is we have to first of all show that we are on the same side. So one of the best examples of this is a guy called Daryl Davis. He's a black American guy in America, and he's infiltrated the KKK hundreds of times and got hundreds of people to leave the KKK. How he does that is not by standing there and getting on his high horse, although he would have every right to do that. Instead, what he does is he goes to Klan rallies. He befriends them. He doesn't judge them, right? Again, this can sound quite controversial, but this is the way to overcome belief-based systems, because with a belief-based system, either you're one of them or you're an outsider. If you're an outsider, you're never going to be able to change this ego-based, which is why unconditional love and acceptance is essential. It's why the mental frame collaboration over competition is essential. And over time, obviously, Daryl Davis is a confident, intelligent, successful black guy, goes against everything that the KKK kind of believe, and the guys start realizing, wait, they've been indoctrinated, and then by their own accord and volition, and probably by a few kind of acupuncture pressure points at the right time, by Mr. Daryl Davis, they leave, right? That's how you get over a belief-based system. You have to be the ego wants friend, although you have to be the ego state's friend, which means we can be frustrated and angry that we're procrastinating and we're self-sabotaging ourselves, right? We can be all of those things, but we have to be the bigger man, we have to be the bigger woman in order to overcome that, right? In order to be like, yes, I am frustrated, so you can own it, but for you, I only have unconditional love and acceptance for you. And just in case you don't know, this part of you is you. So if you're not like that, you're just not being accepting and loving to yourself, right? Who said that? The third is thinking-based systems. This is when science, meritocracy, scientific method, testing things comes into prominence. This is when we kind of enter our late teens into adulthood. And if ego-based systems and belief-based systems, these are where a lot of our ego states will be trapped. An ego-based system, an ego want, or an ego state will be trapped in an ego want because it just wants that ego want, and it can't plan, it doesn't have strategic thinking, it can't work with anybody else because an ego want is just almost like a dominator thing. It's just like, I just want this, right? So that's how you can get trapped there. Again, the healing process is being like, yeah, I want that too. This is just a better way to get it. And then you take away again, this is why split ego states are a lot more complex. Then you would probably, in that situation, you would integrate it, and then you would have to take any kind of power or authority you have away from that ego one. That's how I worked with that one of my clients to get him over watching porn. Because just because you both want it, that ego want is having a bigger voice in and of yourself. There's no need for it to be a bully or to be a dictatorship. It's actually your responsibility. So you can take that empowerment back from the ego want while still having its voice heard. Belief-based system, people can get trapped there because they believe something, and every time somebody tries to change it, it's being an outsider, the belief gets locked more and more in place, and then suddenly it's just a belief-based system. Thinking-based systems are actually really nice to work with, because as soon as you give a thinking-based system different data to work with, then it will change its conclusion. Whereas a belief will dig in and be like, that's not my facts, that's not my belief, right? And an ego want just doesn't care and can't really comprehend the facts, really, right? It just cares about getting its ego want satiated. And also remember, with ego-based wants, sometimes they're authentic, sometimes they're coming from shadow. Belief-based systems, sometimes it's authentic, sometimes it's coming from shadow. Thinking-based systems is the same. But with a thinking-based system, it can be like, I think that the world is actually unfair, or I think that dating just isn't for me. I think that I just am those types of people that procrastinates. You know, a lot of the marketing and tests I'm seeing are people doing tests actually nowadays, and they're saying, oh, this is your type of thinking, and then it locks people into believing that they are this archetype and they can't change, right? Whereas with a thinking-based system, all you have to do is bring in new data and new evidence. So I'm working with one guy, he's a software engineer, who has a lot of problems with thinking. And he can think that he's being really open and being really logical, but a lot of the time he's drawing conclusions. And as soon as we get into how those conclusions are drawn, we realize that it's just coming from assumptions rather than data. And as soon as we can see that, he changes his worldview, and that's how he creates breakthroughs. And then I included awareness-based systems because they're a thing. There's something which is above thinking-based systems. All of these are transcend and include. So we transcend and include each and one of those. But an awareness-based system would be, whereas a thinking-based system would need data and meta studies on whether unconditional love is good or bad for a relationship in order to draw a conclusion. An awareness-based system would just know that unconditional love is only ever a positive. Like true unconditional love is only ever a positive to a relationship, right? Like you don't need a thinking-based system for that. It doesn't mean that you don't welcome studies and meta-studies and you don't welcome there could be a possibility that you're wrong. But until then, you can just be like, okay, that's my my awareness. I just know. And it's very hard to have an ego state that has a block around that. So I won't go into too much detail. That's the overview of split ego states. Again, I go into way more detail in the most practical guide to shadow work on the internet. With these, because it gets complex really, really fast, I really recommend going and working with a one-on-one mentor. Enjoy.